It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM. And our conversation this morning with Kate Winkler Dawson is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And Kate is the author of the book American Sherlock-Murder, Forensics, and the Birth of American CSI. And Kate, good morning to you.
Good morning, Todd.
It's wonderful to have you on the air. And boy, this is a book that grabs you right off the first page. How did you do that?
Well, I had excellent source material to work with, thank goodness.
Well,
So, it was just a pleasure to write.
It is a wonderful book and a great exploration of the beginning of really science in criminal justice. And you introduce us to Edward Oscar Heinrich. Do that for our listeners, if you would, this morning.
Sure. So, he was a forensic scientist, really started in about 1910 by opening the first forensics lab. It was a private lab in Berkeley, California. And he worked for 40 years, so he solved more than 2,000 cases, and many of which were criminal cases. So he had this unbelievable career at a time when forensics was really just getting off of the ground in the United States. It really kind of the stars of forensics before 1910 were some scientists in Europe and Italy and France and England, and they were leading the way. But the American forensic scientists really were gathering, their forces together, and they were exchanging information and learning from each other. And this is the beginning of what we know as, sort of the modern CSI.
And he is right there at the very beginning of some of the forms of science and investigative arts that are still in use today, and they're not going away. And he was right there at the beginning of them. And it's fascinating to me the way you develop that. And you do so through many of the cases. So I want to talk, first of all, about your sourcing and how you were able to follow these cases and the development of a pretty extraordinary career.
Well, he had an incredible archive at the University of California at Berkeley. And so I was really excited when I first learned about him because no one had written a book about him. He doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, which I suspect is going to change probably pretty soon. And he was just this unknown outside of forensic circles. And so when I found out about this archive, I had a sad discovery, which was that it was closed, which means researchers aren't allowed to use the material. So I actually had to petition to UC Berkeley and say, I'm an established author, I'm with an established publishing house, and this is why Edward Oscar Heinrich deserves to get this attention, because he needs, he made history, he was an innovator, and he deserves to have a book written about him. And I, at first, was discouraged because the, assistant archivist said, this probably isn't going to happen. We're underfunded. We don't have enough researchers. And this is, a very large collection, more than 100 boxes. And so you can imagine how long it would take for somebody to dig through it and catalog it. But then the head archivist, Laura Michaels, to her credit, emailed me and said, I'll do it. It's going to take a couple of years. I can work one day a week. I will bring you to the warehouse to work alongside me, and I won't have the box numbers available just yet, but you can do your research, because she really understood how important this book was. And so that, the source material is incredible because Heinrich was this incredible photographer. He didn't like other people taking photos of his crime scenes, so he has all the photos. He kept his case files, he kept his notes, he kept journals, he kept a diary. And that is just a dream for any researcher. And his son kept all of his letters from his father. And Heinrich kept all of his letters from his mother and, to his sort of Watson sidekick, who was a librarian in Tacoma. So all of these people kept letters, and I was able to create these conversations that actually happened.
With Oscar Heinrich, that only seems appropriate, I know. Just for him to get into the career that he finally chose to do, and that such a pioneering career as it was, that's an amazing achievement. His childhood, his young adulthood, they were not easy lives.
No, his father died unexpectedly. They had had a lot of financial problems. and his father died unexpectedly, and it left him as the man in charge. And he was, 16. He had two sisters and a mother to try to support. So even though he loved school, he had to drop out, and he grew up in Tacoma, Washington. And he started working as kind of a cleanup boy at a pharmacy, but he really, really wanted to be a pharmacist, and he knew it would be a good income. So when he turned 18, he read books on his own, and he took the state board exams, and he became a pharmacist. So that's where he learned about drugs and, medicinal whiskey and everything that goes along with, human behavior, what you see in a pharmacy. And then he talked his way, without having a high school degree, talked his way into UC Berkeley, and he graduated with a chemistry degree. But in that, he learned about biology and all the mathematics and physics, trigonometry. And then when he left, he took the degree and he got a job as a sanitation engineer, and then as a chemical engineer, and then as a police chief. All of these careers that he had were before he even became a criminologist. He really decided that he wanted to stay in the scientific field. So he had a more solid foundation than anyone else who was involved in forensics at this time period. Everybody else was sort of, they would read books and maybe they had a little bit of formal education, but he really had solid footing in all of these different disciplines, in botany, entomology, the study of bugs, in geology. All of this was based on what he learned in a real school.
One of the fascinating aspects of me about your writing is you take us inside the cases. And we can see Oscar Heinrich moving through them, learning his craft as he does, and still they're very, very important cases. They are cases that are groundbreaking in many cases, and as you reflect upon them, you can see where he made mistakes, where he stumbled and failed, and where he had great successes. But there was a lot of pressure on him right from the very beginning, wasn't there?
There was. This is a fantastic time period for an author to write in, which is Prohibition, really the beginning of Prohibition. It's not a great time period for Americans living through it. And, with Prohibition, which was, of course, prohibiting alcohol in the United States, came incredible levels of crime. Just 80% through the roof, because organized crime was really starting to develop around alcohol. And so Heinrich was, along with the other forensic scientists, under this incredible pressure to solve these cases, because the criminals seemed to be getting smarter. They seemed to be knowing more about science and what they were doing with fingerprints and footprints and all of this, and so he really was someone who was incredibly important, not just to police in California, but all over the country. The federal government hired him during World War I. He, was a code breaker. He really covered every part of crime solving that you could think of. But it was a tremendous amount of pressure. Listen, he sent 6 men to death row at San Quentin in just 1 year. So you have to feel that type of pressure, but you also have to have a confidence about you, self-confidence and sort of an arrogance. Sherlock Holmes, arrogance, and he had that.
There were many, many cases that you detail in the book. The Fatty Arbuckle case is fascinating. It didn't turn out so well from Heinrich's standpoint. The Father Heslin case is one of the first ones that you look at. And the Bessie Ferguson case is really interesting as well.
Well, and these cases, the victims are really interesting, and of course the suspects are really interesting. And some of these cases we know about. So Fatty Arbuckle has quite a reputation that I think was wrongly ganged, mostly because of Oscar Heinrich and his decisions during this case, but you'll just have to read a little bit more about that. But the Bessie Ferguson case that you're referring to, involves a victim who might not have been given the most sympathy, particularly someone as stodgy as Heinrich. He really believed that women should continue to wear corsets and have chaperones. And so he was able to, really look past any reputation that the victim might have had and look at the evidence objectively. And so, right, these cases, are not just about the victim or the perpetrator. It's about Heinrich and his development, not just as a forensic scientist, but as a man, as a husband, as a father of 2 boys. And so you see throughout the book how he grows. Sometimes he regresses. Sometimes he has huge triumphs. Sometimes he makes really, really grave mistakes. So that's what makes it interesting, is you have, I think, this character who you're seeing these stories through his lens. But then I'll pull back and I'll say, listen, this is where we are right now with forensics. This was bad science. This was good science. This is the history of each piece. But, it's told in a way where it's interwoven within the story.
Well, it's called American Sherlock for a good reason, because these are true mystery stories, and we get to watch him as he works them. Some of the techniques that he embraces were embraced by law enforcement for many, many years, even decades, and then have been discredited since. But it was the science of the time, and just to watch him adopt, discredit, move on to another new technique, another new technology, and just to see him at work in the case, you take us inside of that. You do such a masterful job. It is really, really a tremendous read. Kate Winkler Dawson, I want to thank you for joining us this morning here on Indiana in the Morning.
Thank you, Todd. I really appreciate it.
Now, folks want to know more. Where do they need to go?
You can go to my website, which is katewinklerdawson.com, and I have a newsletter people can join if they'd like. But there's also information on, behind the scenes for the book and other projects that I'll be working on in the future. So that's a good place to start.
Terrific stuff. Thanks so much, and have a great day today.
You too, Todd. Thank you. Todd, thank you.